Hello and welcome to the Global Passivhaus Showcase, presented by House Accelerator, a catalyst of zero carbon building. We're happy you're here. We welcome all comers to our exploration of how to slash the greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings and make them more resilient to the extreme temperatures, the wild weather, and the grid insecurity caused by climate change. So, whether you're Passivhaus curious or Passivhaus expert, this is a place to learn the do's and don'ts, the best practices, and the lessons learned of Passivhaus design and construction. We'll dive into how Passivhaus design principles are applied in the real world and how this approach to construction impacts the health and happiness of the people who live and work in these buildings. Are you new to all of this? Visit the Passivhaus 101 section of our website to get started. With that, please enjoy the showcase and pose your questions in chat for the discussion session after the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. I just wanted to say a couple things. Can you hear me, Sean? Yes? Okay. So I don't know about you guys, but winters can be hard for me. I grew up in Southern California, sunlight, you want more of it this time of year. And I was just talking with it. We came back after the new year and we had an all staff meeting, and I have a bunch of colleagues who are working on offshore wind, and they were talking about all the great things that they're doing there. And that got me up a little. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, a colleague who's doing fleet advisory services for electrification. So delivery, trying to get them to go to electric. Lots of progress being made. And it's all so exciting. And I got off the all staff and I was like, wow, we're working in the hardest part, buildings, right? We all know this is the hardest nut to crack. And but then later that night, I was listening to a speech by Vinood Khosla, who is the founder of Sun Microsystems. He's a venture capitalist. He does a lot of work investing in climate solution technologies. And he said some things that I thought were just really interesting with that in mind. And one of them is the really hard things are really the only things worth trying. And he said, we must bring the impossible to implausible, to possible, to probable, and then we need to make it happen. And so tonight, even though sometimes it seems like it's hard work, I think we should all give a cheer. Cheers to doing the hard work. So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
And now I think, Zach,
breakout
rooms?
Great. Thanks, Beth. So we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 5 or 6 minutes. So these will be smaller groups of about 6 people each. So this is a chance to do some rapid fire introductions of one another. So make sure that you get around your circle or across your grid or whatever the right terminology is. And I will set it up now and we'll see you in 5 or 6 minutes. All right, guys, we are all back. And so it's time for us to get moving into the program. And Bev, can you take it away?
Sure.
Thank you.
Tonight we have 2 fantastic speakers, and I gotta say I'm really excited about this topic, health. So important to the subject of buildings and how we address climate change. So Bomi Jung is the principal of Topside Advisors, which provides strategic advisory services to building organizations, including architecture and engineering firms, as well as climate-focused nonprofits. And I think most of us know Bomi because of her completely groundbreaking work helping with policy in New York City. She worked at the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, and led the development and implementation of public housing's most ambitious 10-year strategic sustainability plan. And I think you guys know NYCHA is the biggest owner of apartments in the nation. Before that, Bomi designed and led the New York City climate programs of enterprise community partners. And she's joined tonight with Yuan Tan, who is an associate of Rocky Mountain Institute's carbon-free buildings team. And that team's really working to eliminate fossil fuels from our buildings in a way that guarantees healthy, sustainable, and permanently affordable homes for all. Yuan currently researches the co-benefits of whole home retrofit packages, especially for frontline and environmental justice communities. Yuan works both on state and local level policy with a particular focus on New York State and New York City. And she's doing something that I think is super important, which is investigating the role that public and affordable housing programs can play in driving faster adoption of green building practices. Welcome, Bomi and Yuan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
So first of all, just wanted to thank all of you for having us here to share, how we can be decarbonizing our homes to support healthier communities, particularly for ones that bear the heaviest economic, social, and environmental burdens. Thanks for the great introduction, Bev. I'm Yuan, and I am going to pass the mic to Bomi to hear about some of her work, the questions that we're asking, and what we hope you may take away from our chat today.
Thanks, Yuan. And I'm so pleased to be here again. I saw a few names in the attendees of folks who have been colleagues for more than a decade, and I'm so pleased to be able to present this particular piece of research that we've done together. I don't. Many of you don't know this, but or actually probably none of you know this. But after spending more than 15 years working on affordable housing and climate action, I recently pivoted a bit to work on a software solution that again looks at speeding up decarbonization in buildings. But it's going back to my pre-urban planning days, where I started out my career after college working in the .com space. And so to me personally, this is a little bit of a capstone of sorts. And so Yuan, if you could advance the slide. So I'll continue to be talking about decarbonization and Passivhaus and all of those things, but with a slightly different lens. Before I get going, I wanted to just blurt out the one thing that I think was really exciting for me as a Passivhaus fangirl and Passivhaus booster, which is that we set out in this report to really look at let's gather up all of the things that we already know essentially as facts, right? By looking at doing a literature review essentially of other literature reviews. Let's really establish what are the things that we've already essentially proven to ourselves through rigorous research. And then let's think about what we need to do about it. And the reason why I'm really excited about the sort of what I would consider or to offer you all as the Passivhaus community, the takeaway message is that there's a way to think about and speak about Passivhaus in a way that is very much tied to these questions of justice and equity. And sometimes I think that in the Passivhaus community we have a tendency to get so excited about the technical accomplishments of things that sometimes when we're asked to speak in ways that talk more about broader societal impacts, it may seem like there's a disconnect. But I think that that what we have the story that we've pieced together through research is really speaking to how building quality buildings is in fact a foundation of equitable climate solutions. So next. And the sort of basic fact that we have to start with is that the housing stock in the United States is not in fantastic shape, right? So something like 35% of all the occupied units in a national survey of housing quality reported that they had some kind of repair need. And of those 35% that report, 40 some odd percent are reporting faults that are really pretty serious, things that are, moisture and bulk water management that lead to mold and mildew, structural problems. And so we're talking about a housing stock that is, even beyond affordability challenges, really not in fantastic shape. And that is the background against which we really have to talk about all of the things that Passivhaus improves in terms of housing quality. When you look at how low-income communities and historically underserved communities fare in all of this, as you would imagine, the low-income communities really bear the disproportionate burden of occupying housing that is not of good quality. And on top of that fact, we also know that the dependence on fossil fuel is high among low-income families, partly because of geographic factors. But at the end of the day, the fact is that there is a real health disparity related to a disproportionate exposure to PM2.5, 2.5, for example. And what happens in buildings that that causes that is largely related to burning fossil fuels, both in the building and impact community-wide impacts. And so one of the, as we've seen is a policy motivator recently, or driver recently, the push to really this message of getting gas out of buildings. It's not just a matter of climate change, it's also real health impacts. So as I said, what we did in our research was really to try and establish, what are the ground truths of health research that relate to building quality and environmental quality, and we try to do that in a very broad based way. So not just looking at indoor environmental quality, but climate risks as well, things like the ability of the building to protect from heat waves. And basically the three messages that we wanted to put out into the community is, number one, that we really want to be pushing for electrification in the context of a holistic package of housing quality improvements. And so, I think there is a message that could be heard these days as, everything, if you just electrify all the doodads, then we're all good. What we're saying here is that what the evidence shows is that it's housing quality that matters, not just electrification in terms of benefiting residents. And then the second takeaway is that because of disproportionate vulnerability and disproportionate exposure to health harms generally, that when you fix these problems, the health benefits that result accrue disproportionate to low-income communities, which is where it becomes an equity and justice issue. And then the third message that we have is that much of what we can do can be done locally. It's fantastic that we have a federal government that's now mobilized around climate goals, but that's not where we don't need to wait for those things. There's a lot that cities and state governments can do today. Next. So one of the things that I wanted to explain before turning over to Yuan to go through the findings in the report more in detail is this idea that there is a definition of beneficial electrification that applies to housing. So beneficial electrification, as we hear it, in the literature and in the dialogues today, really is talking about balancing benefits, environmental benefits with benefits to operating electric grids, right? Generally speaking. But if you look at the history of the term, and I actually found like the guy that I'm pretty sure is like the father of the term beneficial electrification. And this term actually came from a time when gas companies were arguing that because of the transmission losses in electricity, that electricity should be abandoned in favor of gas for efficiency reasons. And so the electric industry was arguing, well, no, there's things that you really, there are beneficial uses of electricity where electricity really is the better solution. And they looked at things like it's better to use computers, and you can't use computers on gas, right? And so they had it started out as a very different concept, this idea of beneficial electrification, and then more recently it was picked up by oh my God, I just had that neuron got fired on by or hit by a cosmic ray, and now well, anyway, the Association of Utility Regulators kind of revived it as this idea saying, well, really, but what we're talking about in beneficial electrification, the beneficial part is that you have to, show multiple dimensions of benefits, not only in the environmental impacts, but also in the operations of the grid. And so what we're arguing here is that, if you're going to use this term beneficial electrification and apply it to housing, really you need to look at it in terms of what are the benefits that are relevant to housing quality. So these are, the buildings exist and homes exist first and foremost to provide safe and affordable, safe housing. And so, it's not just a matter of the greenhouse gas impacts. It's not just a matter of the impacts on the grid. It's really a matter of what are the benefits that accrue to the residents in the housing specifically. And so that's what we mean by this term beneficial electrification of housing. And then, what we argue basically in the paper is that in order to really maximize the beneficial electrification of housing, that you need to have a passive house that's electrified, right? And then we go on to show, why we've come to that conclusion based on essentially health research. And next, and then as far as how we hope for this report to be used, one of the difficulties in working on this report is that we were really trying to bridge a bunch of different areas of practice. So we would like for housing advocates to use and understand the terminology that's used by building scientists, and we would like for the building science folks to use and understand the language that's used by public health experts, and sort of get on the same page about where our priorities are overlapping. And now I'll pass it on to Yuen.
Thanks, Bomi. We used a three-pronged approach to look deeper into this topic. So first, we synthesized existing research and analysis of different building level interventions to understand how each may impact the health of residents and the community. Then we contextualized all of this information within the reality that certain communities face disproportionate economic, health, and social burdens because of many reasons. And finally, we put together some recommendations for state and local actors to further this work. We identified that there are many mechanisms through which beneficial electrification can deliver health improvements, from indoor air and environmental quality to safe indoor temperatures during extreme heat and cold, and even increased energy security. Let's take a closer look. So the undesirability of introducing combustion-related pollutants into the home has long been acknowledged in health literature, right? Both short-term and long-term exposure to combustion pollutants are linked to a variety of adverse health impacts, as we've demonstrated here in the table on the right. Removing any sort of in-home combustion has been shown to immediately reduce the risk of health harms, such as decreased lung function, asthma incidence, cardiovascular disease, amongst many others. Studies also show that a combination of a high performance envelope with compartmentalization and enhanced ventilation has many positive effects on indoor environmental quality. So we can see a reduction in pest infestations and the moisture conditions that often lead to mold. It also prevents infiltration of potentially polluted outside air. Additionally, my colleagues at RMI did some modeling and found that those high performance envelopes also have the added benefit of providing increased hours of safety, which is the maintenance of safer indoor temperatures during hot or cold weather. And this analysis also compared a passive house standard building envelope to a code compliant new building during a power outage in a cold snap, and found that this passive house was able to maintain safe indoor temperatures 4 days longer than the code building. So in our exploration, we also document the benefits of adopting all electric equipment and appliances, and how that may increase the access to air conditioning and the ability to mitigate deadly effects of extreme heat events. So high performance envelopes can contribute to more efficient cooling and safer indoor temperatures, but we're finding that they can't fully mitigate the effects of heat buildup if we didn't have AC. So like when temperatures overnight stay high, such as during a heat wave. And we did some analysis of different cooling technologies during a heat wave this past summer in Seattle. And we found that heat pumps are the most climate-aligned cooling technology, while also being superior at maintaining a comfortable and safe indoor air temperature. The evidence also strongly suggests that removing in-building combustion can have a great impact on what goes on outside of our buildings. Combustion equipment in our homes, such as boilers, furnaces, hot water heaters, are typically vented to the outside. And so eliminating these would contribute to better outdoor and neighborhood air quality. And a recent Harvard study found that roughly 15,000 to 20,000 premature deaths that occur nationally in the US every year are due to outdoor PM 2.5 air pollution from burning fossil fuels in residential buildings only. We can also be reducing the demand on aging, leaky, and risky gas distribution infrastructure. And research is finding that, leaking supply lines and equipment in buildings are contributing to significant fugitive methane levels in cities, which is pretty alarming. Finally, the combination of electrification and high efficiency, climate appropriate smart technology gives us a great opportunity to increase affordability and reliability of energy access, which is a very important driver of health inequity. The reliability and affordability of energy access, it has an important impact on health. When households are unable to adequately meet their basic household energy needs, or what is known as energy insecurity, a wide range of health issues can occur, such as stress and poor mental health, to poor sleep and cardiovascular and respiratory health. Direct health harms such as carbon monoxide poisoning, temperature-related illness, and even death can occur when residents resort to alternative energy sources to meet needs when conventional methods fail them. We go on to identify how communities face disproportionate economic, health, and social burdens, and why we need to center these circumstances as we start to decarbonize our building stock. So evidence shows that low-income communities repeatedly face stressors on multiple levels, and they experience both heightened vulnerability and exposure in comparison to more affluent populations. Some of these vulnerabilities we have identified include systemic racism, marginalization, and discrimination, limited access to resources, and the resulting trade-offs, as well as poor neighborhood and household conditions. These communities grapple with heightened exposure as well to location-based pollutants, for example, because they are closer to polluting sources such as power plants, highways, Superfund sites. They are also at risk to climate risks such as extreme heat, being located in flood zones, and in-home pollutants and allergens. Health research indicates that 60% of the burden of health disease is just directly attributable to living in poverty and its associated risks. Studies also show that children under the age of 6 who live in a home that use a gas stove or oven for supplemental heat are 80% more likely to have asthma than children in homes that do not. In the US, summer temperature differences between redlined and non-redlined neighborhoods can approach up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. 70% of people living below the poverty line also have significantly higher exposure to surface urban heat than those above the poverty line. The fact is that the combination of all these factors and disparities serves as a sort of magnifying glass, I like to call it, for any impact, be it good or bad. For example, when the New York City Mayor's Office modeled the health and air quality benefits of electrifying our buildings, asthma emergency room visits were reduced by 10 times more in lower income communities than compared to more affluent neighborhoods, even though the reduction in pollution was similar. The fact is, the circumstances that these communities face are immensely different, and we absolutely must be taking that into account when designing policies. Bomi will now walk us through what that might look like.
Thanks, Yuan. If you would go to the next slide, please. So actually, if you could advance one more. We looked at a number of recommendations, and these are not so much like specific recommendations for state and local governments to go copy down. So these are not like model recommendations. They're really more areas. Things for policymakers to think about, and we looked at it in four buckets. One is looking at sort of enabling policies that try to bring in the voice of the affected communities into these sorts of policy discussions. And this is really important from a climate justice perspective, because it's not just a matter of who gets benefits. It's not just a matter of do low-income people, do low-income residents get better buildings? And obviously that's fantastic, and we want to do that. But part of what makes this conversation a really rich one when it comes to justice is that what low-income communities are saying they want to have a part in that decision making. And so we looked at some recommendations about how to bridge the kind of the sort of centralized processes that characterize policymaking, and grounding that kind of conversation more in the communities. The second bucket of things that we looked at was, how do you use the small portion of this is all US stuff, by the way, small portion of the housing that is directly subsidized and regulated. So this is primarily income restricted housing that's subsidized through federal government programs. How do we use that, what we call traditionally affordable housing? How do we use that to move markets? And what are the things that we could do to raise the bar in affordable housing that moves the construction market overall? And there's a lot that affordable housing has done in the past that we can sort of rinse and repeat with, except we do it with better codes and better standards. Next. The third bucket was really about addressing codes and standards and bringing things up from the bottom, and that's really addressing getting everyone to improve the quality of buildings, as opposed to sort of creating a leading class of buildings that are pulling from the front. And there's a lot of work that a lot of other organizations like the Institute for Market Transformation, where I'm a board member, there are folks who are working on adopting building performance standards, and that are also trying to incorporate health benefits and these other kinds of performance metrics into the building performance standards, which is really, I think, a really interesting area for folks to explore. And then finally, we talked about, of course, you can't really talk about low-income housing without talking about resources dedicated for low-income housing. And I think that we traditionally in the affordable housing sector, we've sort of always operated from a scarcity kind of mentality. I don't know that that's really going to change anytime soon. And so one of the things that we really talked about here is that when the housing advocates go up for affordable housing funding, other folks who are in aligned industries, like folks who are working in the built environment sector, generally speaking, we should really be supporting that, because there are opportunities to move the field forward through affordable housing. And if affordable housing just isn't funded, it not only impacts the folks who are directly benefiting, but it affects the ability of state and local governments to do that kind of leading work that can be done through affordable housing regulation. And then lastly, on the similar kind of front, there's a lot of regulations that at different levels of government are kind of hampering each other's efforts. And so that's another area as far as looking at how to speed things up. Just resolving conflicts would in of itself make the system more efficient. So those are sort of just a flavor of the kinds of recommendations that we made in that last section.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic, and there's some great questions that we're going to jump to soon. Just before we do, I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. These are folks who make everything happen for us here at the Accelerator. So big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors, Proseco, and SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you too to our patron sponsors, Aero Aggregates, Aero Barrier, Brennan Insulation and Airtightness, Brooklyn Solar Works, Euroline Windows, Inotech Windows and Doors, Lamelux, Owens Corning, RDH Building Science, Sanderson Sustainable Design, and U.S. Engineered Wood T-Stud. So a big thank you to our sponsors. And now we're gonna have QA concierge duties performed by Michael Ingui, who's gonna be pinch hitting tonight for Sean St. Amour. Michael, as many of you know, is the founder of Passivhaus Accelerator. He's also principal of Baxt Ingui Architects. So Michael, please take it away.
Thanks, Zach. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing. I did this the last time I stepped in as well. I'm going to ask the first question. Me first. Anyway, so I'm so used to looking at retrofitting in New York City as an architect, and I love some of your initial slides, and I love the fact that you were talking about electrification, really truly kind of decoupled from envelope and building performance, although obviously they work well together. But there are some really obvious health benefits. And as you look at buildings, we're looking at all of our buildings, and we know that very often you have to work on things incrementally. What makes the biggest difference? Where do people start? That's a very wide question, I know, and it probably depends on building type. But what are your thoughts?
Ben, you want to go first? And this is probably one where I would expect our answers to diverge a little bit. So,
Michael, do you mean like the biggest difference in terms of emissions or health impacts?
Yeah, I mean, I find myself confused about which one I would go with first. I mean, I'm kind of assuming that very often you'd go with what's breaking first. As something as I'm dealing with an existing building, I'm probably fixing things, and as my gas range goes, I'm probably going to switch it to an electric, or an induction, and I'll do it that way. But in terms of health and the well-being of the occupants. Again, I'm decoupling purposely in this question, building performance and facade and so forth, and just talking about electrification. Health benefits, or just quality of life. What's making the biggest difference?
I am going to try and give myself some parameters to talk about this. So let's use a multifamily building in New York City to start with, retrofitting. And I think if we're thinking about health impacts, we want to be thinking about what we have the closest proximity to. And I think the thing with the difference between, like looking at boilers, which would have the biggest emissions impact. And if we're talking about reductions, that's where you want to be looking. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of those emissions and pollutants are going to be vented outside. And if you're living in a multifamily building, unless you are just leaving your windows open all the time and, breathing that in 24/7, the chances are you're going to have a closer relationship to something like your gas stove. And your gas stove is going to have a bigger impact on your indoor air quality, where you will also spend most of your time in, than compared to a boiler that is how many floors down in the basement and is venting outside. So I think my first reaction to, the question of like, what could have the biggest health impact, we need to be thinking about what we spend the most time with, right? And I think the thing that comes to mind really is the gas stove. And I'm looking at my gas stove right now. It's looking at me very menacingly, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, and I would have a little bit of a different answer to this, because I think it's really important to think about overall housing quality, right? And so I know that, particularly as building sector professionals and folks who have to deal with construction scopes, we have to think about, chopping up the construction work into bits and pieces that we can implement and chew on, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, so I want to give this like big caveat about like, we should really do it all, we should just get the money and do it all. But having said that, I think that if push came to shove, I would say, I would put, and I want to say these are all like very, very close proximity to each other, but I would put compartmentalization first because of pest migration and odors and noise and all of those sort of, very, much more noticeable quality of life issues. And it sounds sort of very, I think in some ways very unsexy, and also like in existing buildings, like really hard to do, right? Like how do you properly seal, existing building units from each other? I mean, I tried to do sort of a test of this with test study of this with Stephen Winter Associates when I was at NYCHA, and even just trying to figure out a plan to test the interior compartmentalization of units within an existing building was kind of a pain in the butt. And so it wouldn't be easy, but I do think that like looking at sort of these issues that residents actually bring up as quality of life issues, which are really often tied to they talk about pests, but really we're talking about sealing things, right? And then right after that, I would have to say it's heat, right? Because, well, you look at why do we have, when you look at these sort of catastrophic events like the fire that we just had in the Bronx, it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that a supplemental heat situation? And that's what you would, not that you would expect it, right? But that is the lamentable, observed fact, right? Is that if you've got crappy heat and people are supplementing in dangerous ways, and that is an immediate life safety threat. And then the third item I would say is cooling. And we haven't, I think in New York in particular, Michael, we haven't really talked about cooling very much in the public policy sense. But I've been hearing from our colleagues, some of whom were readers on our report for us, for years that high heat is the thing that already kills, is the climate change related impact that already kills the most people in New York City, right? So I would say those three things in that order. And I think about it less in terms of getting gas out versus, getting gas out first versus doing envelope. I really think it's really about how do you have tangible impacts that the residents can see and feel.
Yeah, good answers. That's great. And that was great. It was such a wide open question. So sorry that I made that the first one. But Jeff Roden, you're the second one, and you had I can tell you're wondering which of your 3 or 4 comments I'm talking about. But or I'll ask it for you. Is really the compartmentalization question, which is now coming up in the chat a few times in terms of how you do the blower doors and so forth. But I do think that Jeff, you can ask it if you wanted to. But in terms of just how important is that, especially given what we're doing with what we're doing, how where does that go in the scale of things?
So my initial question was was answered in the chat by Bomi, thank you, which was, are there any specific studies around the effects of compartmentalization? But beyond that, I think there is a broader question, which is gets to the tragedy in New York City with so many people dying. What killed those people was smoke and gas transmission between the units. And I was a presenter with a fire safety consultant, and he had no idea that a blower door test could be performed on a unit to actually quantify the level of transmission between units. So I guess part of this discussion, I think, has to be how do we engage the fire protection community in that we have the tools that they need in order to protect our multifamily residents from this kind of tragedy. So, I'll just open that up as a sort of a point of discussion, and either for now or later, it doesn't matter.
We make that point in the paper that, when we talk about compartmentalization and air sealing, that, for the most part, the things that you are supposed to be doing is already required of you because of the fire code, right? It's just that, to your point, fire code inspection, whether that sealing is done or not is a visual inspection, which is silly, right? Because we have tools to be able to test it, but that hasn't been institutionalized in the way that we do quality assurance for those sorts of scope items. So, that certainly seems like a thing that would, benefit a lot from what you're talking about like getting on the same page with the fire safety folks.
Right. Well, people, it's unfortunate still, but people, I think, still respond to health concerns and safety concerns above, climate energy efficiency concerns. And, we should all be sharing a lot more in this area, and it's just I just don't understand why it doesn't happen. I'm puzzled by it, which is kind of what I said in the chat.
I think that this. I'm sorry to philosophize a little bit here, but just looking back on the whatever 17 years or whatever that I've been involved in this field, I feel like there were some ideas that seemed like great ideas maybe 15 or so years ago that, that have become sort of the how we do business, like just the emphasis on modeling, these sorts of things, where I feel like a lot, the value that the tools around Passivhaus, are able to deliver is sort of moving from this, very, upfront design and modeling kind of, methodology, to really saying it's really about testing and testing, while you have the opportunity to change what's there. And so to me, that's, I think, another sort of powerful potential message that, that you could go out with to other allied, fields, is to say, look, just test.
Is there, last question. The standard for Passivhaus is 0.06 CFM per square foot of enclosure, right? That's the current FIA standard. For compartmentalization, it's 0.3. That's 5 times amount of air transmission that's permitted between units. And with health issues, with COVID and everything else, I mean, it's just, I'm wondering where that came from, or is it just, we just haven't got there yet, that we need that should be ratcheted. I think it should be 0.06 for both, just as a point of discussion.
So just to get to one of the next questions, guys, just because I know it was going to be short on time, we're almost at the top of that hour, and I think we can go on and on about that one. So Sean, is Sean still here? So I'll ask Sean's question for him. So how does the community move the needle to get building performance standards into the local building codes? Have you seen good progress when individuals write letters or connect with politicians? What else can we do as a community to really move the needle and assist in some action items?
I can tackle this one first. So I was working in part with the California Energy Commission last year as they went through their process of updating their building code. And something that really seemed to resonate is the health and safety narrative, and specifically how that relates to our buildings and fossil fuel infrastructure. And something that, I felt had a great impact is just hearing from community members, whether it's health professionals who also have kids and who have kids with asthma, or, survivors of cancer that resulted from, say, the Aliso Canyon tragedy. And so I think in terms of, how people can be involved and how the community can really speak, I think just mobilize and talk and make sure that you're talking to the people who are making decisions for us, and make sure that they know what your priorities are. And, personal stories are very important. And, however that may be, I think organizing and mobilizing around these causes can really do wonders. We were pushing for an all-electric building code. We didn't get that, but there were concessions that I think are still small wins that we need to take, and that was the CEC, making a commitment to fund studies and RCTs that look at the impacts of gas in homes and what kind of impact that has on indoor air quality. And there's still like a recognition that there is a differentiated impact, that gas has that electric does not have. And so that's a very long way of saying that, any way that you can voice your concerns or voice your opinions, do so. Get in touch with your local community leaders. If there's any opportunity for public comment, just get involved, write a letter if you don't feel comfortable speaking. But I think like narrative and education and spreading the word is so important. And there's a way for everybody to be involved.
If I might just add also that I think it's, I'm a big proponent of A&E professionals getting involved with community-based organizations, and particularly ones that there are many that do both service provision or own affordable housing and have some sort of an advocacy component. And the reason why I think that would be so beneficial is that, so much of what we talk about is sort of it sounds very inaccessible because it's industry specific, it's somewhat technical. And I think that, getting folks who are out there who on a day-to-day basis mobilize communities for policy causes, to learn how to translate both the values and the specific policies that you're looking for, so that those types of organizations can be allies is really important. And I think that the A&E folks are the ones who ought to do it, because A&E folks are the folks who are the experts at the end of the day.
Great, thank you very much. I know
We'll
that there are some
adopt
more.
the CBO.
Yeah, so I know that there's some more questions, but I'm going to throw it to Zach. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and then maybe we can get to them afterwards, or just email them and we can get back to them.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I have a couple of announcements about what's coming up soon. Before I do that, I want to just make a pitch to everybody. We're going to be doing a bunch of video work in the coming year, and we are looking for B-roll. So this is footage of your projects, or it could be like if you have beautiful drone shots, or you have footage from inside your project that's finished or during construction. We're looking for short pieces that we can intersperse into the videos that we're working on, and of course we'll credit you on the video as it happens. So it's a good way also to, if you're looking for ways to get your firm out there, that's it. We'll be giving you credit anyway. I'm going to be doing a bunch of outreach about this to folks, but I want to just put it out there. If you have video that you are willing to share with us with attribution, we would be very, very grateful. So you can send me an email at Zack, Z-A-C-K, at passivhausaccelerator.com. All right, so on the podcast, we have a great conversation with Kevin Brennan, co-host of Construction Tech, and he talks about his journey to Passivhaus, the impact that a trip to Australia had on his professional life that brought him to Passivhaus, also his experience as a firefighter. Really fun conversation, so please check out the Passivhaus podcast. We also just released our magazine, the Passivhaus Accelerator magazine, edited by Mary James. It's a tremendous issue about climate action from North America to South America, and you can download it as a PDF, also print it as a physical copy if you so choose, and you can find that on the Passivhaus Accelerator website. Next week on Construction Tech, we have Abby Muser-Hare and Katie Jones. Abby is with Precipitate Architecture and Planning, and Katie Jones is the homeowner of this project, Balancing Carbon with Passive Straw Bale. So it's going to be looking at Passivhaus, straw bale, embodied carbon, performance. Really great conversation. On the showcase next week, we will be looking at this stunning single-family home, Olive Passivhaus, designed by Alessandro Ronfini. It's his family's home, and it's this really interesting and kind of high design take on taking that box and turning it into something really beautiful and high performing. And then on January 27th, we have episode 4 of the Building Performance Interactive, which is our Ireland and UK-based show. This will be super insulated, airtight, passive homes in timber frame construction. And so I will include a link to the registration page for that on January 27th. It happens at 9 a.m. Eastern. With that, I think we'll hand it off to you, Bev, for final thoughts and thank yous.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to Bomi and Yuan, because I really think that this discussion about cooking and compartmentalization and health is really, really, really important. We don't talk about this enough, and bringing up the baseline, I think, is just so important on existing buildings, on new buildings, on everything. And I saw Bomi suggested giving an induction countertop unit, which is like $50-60, and you can get them panned too, right? And actually Green Newton has started giving for the school auctions in town. They put those out there with educational materials, so they're reaching all the people who are bidding too. I think that's a really good idea. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I think a lot of people end up staying later if you guys are willing to stick around for a few more questions. But for those of you who have to leave, thanks for joining us, and thanks for coming.